Your house stinks. I'm going to live with my mother-in-law. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my daughter's bedroom, watching her throw clothes into suitcases with a violence that made my chest ache. Emily's face was twisted with disgust as she turned to me, her eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. Your house stinks, she spat, and I'm going to live with my mother-in-law. The words hit me like physical blows. Ruth. My husband's mother. The woman who had never liked me, never thought I was good enough for her son. And now my own daughter was choosing her over me. Emily grabbed her last suitcase and pushed past me, her shoulders slamming into mine hard enough to make me stumble. The front door crashed shut behind her, and I was left standing in the silence of my home, breathing in the scent of lemon cleaner and fresh flowers, wondering what stench she could possibly be talking about. I walked through my house in a daze that evening, opening windows even though the October air in Connecticut was already biting cold. I checked every room, sniffing like a bloodhound, searching for whatever odor had driven my daughter away. The kitchen smelled of the pot roast I'd made for dinner, the bathroom of lavender soap, the living room of the vanilla candles I always kept burning. Nothing. Nothing but the clean, familiar sense of a home maintained with love and care for over 30 years. This was the house where I'd raised Emily, where my husband James and I had built our life together before cancer took him 3 years ago. Every corner held memories, Emily's first steps on that hardwood floor, James teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway, Christmas mornings around the fireplace. And now she claimed it stank. I tried calling her that night. 5 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. I texted her, asking if we could talk, asking what I'd done wrong, asking her to please just tell me what was happening. Nothing. The silence was worse than her cruel words. I sat in James' old recliner, the one I'd kept because it still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I cried until my eyes burned. At 65, I'd thought I knew what loss felt like. I'd buried my husband, buried my parents, said goodbye to friends and colleagues over the decades. But nothing had prepared me for the loss of my living daughter, for the cutting away of someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Sleep didn't come that night. Instead, I lay in bed replaying every interaction with Emily over the past months, searching for clues I'd missed. She'd been distant, yes. Her visits had become shorter, less frequent. She'd started making excuses, she was busy with work, her husband Michael needed her, the kids had activities. But I'd understood. I'd been a working mother too, juggling my teaching career with family obligations. I'd given her space, not wanting to be one of those overbearing mothers who couldn't let go. Had that been my mistake? Should I have pushed harder, demanded more time, insisted on knowing what was wrong? The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. I showered, dressed, and made myself breakfast though I had no appetite. The routine movements were automatic, muscle memory taking over while my mind spun in circles. I'd been a schoolteacher for 37 years, had dealt with difficult students and angry parents, had navigated bureaucracy and politics with grace. Yet here I was, completely blindsided by my own daughter. I poured coffee I wouldn't drink and stared at my phone, willing it to ring. It remained stubbornly silent. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I got in my car and drove to Ruth's house, the sprawling Victorian in the historic district that James had grown up in. Ruth had lived there alone since James' father died 15 years ago, maintaining it with the inheritance James' father had left her. I'd always found it cold, despite its obvious beauty, all dark wood and heavy furniture, like a museum more than a home. I parked in the circular driveway and walked up the stone steps, my heart pounding. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. Emily stood there, and for a moment my heart leapt. But her expression killed any hope. She looked at me with something close to hatred, her arms crossed over her chest. "What are you doing here?" she said, not asked. Her tone was flat, emotionless. "I came to talk," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "To understand what's happening. We need to have a conversation about this, Emily." She laughed then, a harsh sound that didn't match the daughter I knew. There's nothing to talk about, Mother. I've made my choice. I'm living with Grandma Ruth now. This is where I should have been all along. The words were like poison, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why? I asked. Please, just tell me why. What did I do that was so terrible? Emily's eyes narrowed. You really don't see it, do you? She said. How you've let yourself go. How you've become this sad, pathetic old woman living in the past. Dad would be disgusted. That broke something in me. Don't you dare, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Don't you dare speak for your father. He loved that house. He loved our life. And he loved you enough to leave everything to make sure you were taken care of. Emily's expression flickered then, something I couldn't quite read. Yeah, she said slowly. He did. And you've been sitting on it all, haven't you? Not thinking about anyone but yourself. Before I could respond, Ruth appeared behind Emily, her hand possessive on my daughter's shoulder. Margaret, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. How nice of you to visit. But as you can see, Emily is settling in just fine here. Perhaps it's best if you give her some space. She needs time away from, and here she paused, her lips curling slightly, from that environment. I looked between them, seeing something in their shared expression that made my stomach turn. You planned this, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. You've been planning this. Ruth's smile didn't waver. Don't be dramatic, Margaret. Emily is a grown woman making her own choices. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have plans this afternoon. The door closed in my face. I stood there on the porch, shaking with anger and confusion and a grief so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I drove home in a fog, barely remembering the route. Back in my empty house, I walked from room to room again, seeing it with new eyes. Was I living in the past? The photos of James were everywhere, yes. His clothes still hung in the closet because I couldn't bear to give them away. His books lined the shelves, his favorite coffee mug sat in the cabinet. But that was normal, wasn't it? That was love, wasn't it? Not pathology. I spent the next week in a strange limbo. I tried to maintain my routine, my morning walks, my volunteer work at the library, my book club meetings. But everything felt hollow. My friends noticed, of course. They asked gentle questions, offered sympathy when I explained that Emily and I were going through a difficult patch. But I didn't tell them the full truth. How could I explain that my daughter had abandoned me for my mother-in-law, that she thought my home stank, that she believed her dead father would be disgusted by me? The shame was too great. On the 8th day, Ruth called. Her voice was pleasant, almost friendly. Margaret, dear, she said. I was hoping we could have a little family dinner. Just you, me, and Emily. Clear the air, you know. It seemed like an olive branch, an unexpected gift. I agreed immediately, hope flaring in my chest. Perhaps this was all a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could fix it. Ruth suggested Saturday evening at her place, and I spent the next 2 days preparing, getting my hair done, buying a new dress, practicing what I would say to Emily. Saturday arrived. I drove to Ruth's house with a homemade apple pie on the passenger seat, Emily's favorite since childhood. The house looked warm and inviting, lights glowing in the windows against the early evening darkness. Ruth answered the door in an elegant black dress, her white hair perfectly styled. She ushered me in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emily's in the dining room, she said. Why don't you go on in while I check on dinner? I walked through the familiar hallway, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The dining room was set beautifully, Ruth's best china, crystal glasses, fresh flowers in the center. And there was Emily, looking uncomfortable in a dress that seemed too formal for a family dinner. She gave me a tight smile but didn't get up to hug me. I sat down across from her, my carefully prepared words suddenly feeling inadequate. Before I could speak, Ruth returned with wine, filling our glasses with practiced ease. "Let's have a toast," she said. "To family." We drank, though the wine tasted bitter on my tongue. The meal that followed was surreal, Ruth playing the perfect hostess, making small talk about the weather and local events, while Emily barely spoke and I struggled to swallow food that tasted like cardboard. I kept waiting for the real conversation to begin, for someone to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Instead, Ruth dominated the discussion, telling stories about Jameis' childhood, reminding us all that this had been his home, his real home. The implication was clear. Dessert was being served when it happened. Ruth's iPad, sitting on the sideboard, suddenly chimed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The sound of incoming messages. Ruth's hand jerked, wine sloshing from her glass. She moved quickly toward the device, but not before I saw her expression, a flash of pure panic. "It's nothing," she said, her voice higher than normal. "Just spam." But the chiming continued, insistent. Ruth grabbed the iPad, but in her haste, she fumbled it. The device clattered to the floor, landing face up at my feet. I bent to pick it up automatically, and that's when I saw it. The screen was unlocked, open to a messaging app. WhatsApp. And the preview of the latest message made my blood run cold. It was from Emily, sent just minutes ago. "Is she buying it?" The words were right there. I looked up at Emily, whose face had gone white. Then at Ruth, who was reaching for the iPad with trembling hands. But I pulled it back, my teacher's instinct for confiscating contraband kicking in before conscious thought. "What is this?" I asked quietly. "Give that back," Ruth snapped, her friendly facade crumbling. "That's private." But I was already scrolling up, reading messages that made my stomach turn. Days of conversation. Weeks. No, months. Years. Going back and back and back. I saw my name over and over. Margaret. Mom. The old bat. That crazy woman. Words that cut deeper than any physical wound. My hands shook as I kept reading, unable to stop, needing to see it all even though every word was agony. Plans. Schemes. Calculations about money, about property, about my mental state. One message from Ruth to Emily, dated 6 months ago, made me freeze. "Once we get her committed, the money's ours. Just play along like she's crazy. We need to establish a pattern. Document everything. Make sure there are witnesses." I read it 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. Committed. They wanted to have me committed. To take my money, Jameis' inheritance, the life insurance, the house, everything we'd built together. And Emily, my Emily, had agreed. The iPad nearly slipped from my nerveless fingers. I looked up at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face. "You were going to have me committed," I said. The words came out as a whisper. Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ruth recovered first, her voice sharp. "You're taking this out of context," she said. "We were concerned about you, Margaret. You've been showing signs. Living in that house, surrounded by a dead man's things, talking to yourself. We thought," liar, I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. I kept scrolling through the messages, clicking on older conversations. There was more, so much more. Messages where they mocked my grief, laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate a sad old widow. Plans to sell my house, to split the proceeds. Jokes about me, about my loneliness, about the pathetic way I clung to Jameis' memory. Each message was a betrayal, each laugh emoji a knife in my back. And through it all, Ruth's voice urging Emily forward, coaching her, teaching her how to destroy her own mother. Then I saw it. The video files. There were dozens of them, tucked away in a folder marked only with a date. I clicked on the most recent one, and Emily's voice filled the room. The video showed Ruth's kitchen, this kitchen, and Ruth coaching Emily on what to say, how to act. You need to sound more concerned, Ruth was saying in the video. Like you're really worried about her mental state. Try again. Emily repeated her lines, and Ruth nodded approvingly. Perfect. And remember, we need witnesses. Make sure you do this in front of other people. The church ladies, the neighbors, anyone who'll remember. My hand was steady now as I clicked on another video. This one was older, from nearly a year ago. Ruth and Emily were in what looked like Ruth's study, hunched over papers spread across the desk. These are the forms for involuntary commitment, Ruth was explaining. We'll need to show a pattern of behavior. Neglect of personal hygiene, of the home. Paranoid thoughts. Confusion about dates and times. We need to build a case. Emily nodded, taking notes. What about the house, she asked. Once she's committed, we can claim conservatorship, Ruth said confidently. I've already spoken to a lawyer. With a solid case, we can have you declared her legal guardian. Then everything she has becomes accessible to you for her care. And since I'm your beneficiary, she smiled, well, let's just say we'll both be taken care of. I felt physically sick. But I kept watching, kept clicking, driven by a need to see the full extent of their betrayal. There was a video of Ruth coaching Emily on how to plant evidence of my supposed decline. Put expired food in her fridge, Ruth instructed. Mess up her medication bottles. Create disorder. Take pictures of everything. Make it look like she's not caring for herself properly. Another video showed them practicing conversations, Ruth playing the concerned mother-in-law while Emily perfected her worried daughter act. You have to cry, Ruth said critically. Real tears. Think about something sad. Not her, something else. Maybe losing James. Use that. Emily complied, and Ruth clapped her hands. Excellent. That's exactly what we need. But the worst video was the last one I watched. The one that made everything crystal clear. Ruth was alone, talking directly to the camera like she was recording a diary entry. The date stamp showed it was from just 3 weeks ago. This is it, Ruth was saying to herself, her voice giddy with anticipation. After all these years, I'm finally going to win. Margaret never knew, never suspected. She thought I accepted her, that I'd made peace with James choosing her. She smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. But I never forgot. I never forgot what her father did to me. How he cut me out of his will, left everything to her, his precious legitimate daughter. While I got nothing because I was the bastard, the mistake, the secret daughter he was ashamed of. The world tilted. Ruth kept talking, oblivious to my shock. I waited so long for this chance, she continued. When James married her, I saw it, my way back in. I played the dutiful mother-in-law, smiled through every holiday, every birthday, waiting. And then James died, and everything he left her, money that should have been mine, should have been my father's inheritance too, was just sitting there. So I've been patient. I cultivated Emily, showed her what real wealth looks like, made her want it. Made her resent her pathetic mother for not living up to the family name. And now, Ruth's smile was triumphant, now I'm going to take everything. I'm going to bury her just like Dad buried me. The iPad fell from my hands. I stared at Ruth, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not my mother-in-law. My half-sister. The daughter my father had with his mistress, the family's secret I'd never known about. Ruth's smile was gone now, replaced by naked hatred. You weren't supposed to see that, she said quietly. Any of it. This was supposed to be simple. A few more weeks, a few more documented incidents, and you'd have been gone. But you always were a meddler, Margaret. Just like your father. Emily was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. But I couldn't tell if they were tears of guilt or frustration at being caught. Grandma, she said, her voice breaking. What do we do now? Ruth straightened, regaining her composure. We adapt, she said coldly. Margaret, you're going to give me that iPad, and we're going to forget this little scene ever happened. Because if you try to use any of what you saw, it'll tell everyone that you broke into my home, stole my personal device, and are now making wild accusations because of your declining mental state. Who do you think they'll believe? The respected pillar of the community, or the sad widow losing her grip on reality? I stood up, my legs somehow steady despite everything. I believe they'll believe the evidence, I said quietly. All those messages, all those videos, they're not going anywhere. I know how cloud storage works, Ruth. I may be old, but I taught computer skills for 15 years before I retired. Everything you've done, everything you've planned, it's all backed up. And I'm going to make sure everyone sees it. Ruth lunged for me, but I was already moving toward the door. Emily made a half-hearted attempt to block my path, but I pushed past her. My daughter. My betrayer. I drove home with the iPad clutched in my lap, my mind racing faster than my car. The anger was building now, burning away the shock and hurt. They had tried to destroy me. They had plotted for years to steal my life, my legacy, my sanity. Ruth had held a grudge for decades, since before I was even born, and had turned my own daughter into a weapon against me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The patience was terrifying. But now I knew. Now I had proof. And now, for the first time since Emily walked out of my house with those cruel words, I had power. Back home, I locked every door and window. Then I sat down at my computer and I began to download everything from Ruth's iPad. Every message, every photo, every video. I organized it all into folders, backed it up in multiple locations, sent copies to my email. It took hours, but I worked with a methodical precision I recognized from my teaching days. This was lesson planning. This was grading. This was documentation. And I was very, very good at it. By the time the sun rose on Sunday morning, I had everything organized, cataloged, and secured. Evidence that would hold up in any court, in any conversation, against any denial. But I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Because as ID worked through the night, a plan had begun to form. Ruth wanted to destroy me, to bury me like she felt our father had buried her. But she'd made one critical mistake, she'd underestimated me. She'd seen a grieving widow, a sad old woman, an easy target. She hadn't seen the fighter underneath. The woman had put herself through college while caring for a sick mother. The teacher had faced down parents twice her size to protect her students. The wife had nursed her husband through cancer without breaking. Ruth had mistaken gentleness for weakness. And she was about to learn how wrong she'd been. Monday morning, I went to my lawyer. Daniel Chin had handled Jameis' estate, had drawn up our wills, had been our friend for 20 years. I showed him everything, the messages, the videos, all of it. His face grew darker as he reviewed the evidence. This is elder abuse, Margaret, he said finally. Financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly even attempted conservatorship fraud. You could have them both arrested. I shook my head. I will, I said. But not yet. I need your help with something first. Daniel raised an eyebrow, waiting. I need you to help me plan a birthday party, I said, smiling for the first time in days. Ruth's 80th birthday was in 2 weeks. For months, Emily had been planning a big celebration at the church community center. She'd sent out invitations to everyone, Ruth's friends, church members, old family friends, even some of Jameis' colleagues had stayed in touch with Ruth over the years. It was supposed to be a tribute to a beloved matriarch, a celebration of a life well lived. I was going to turn it into something else entirely. Daniel listened to my plan, his expression shifting from concern to understanding to what might have been admiration. Are you sure? He asked when I finished. Very sure, I said. I've spent my whole life being kind, being understanding, being the bigger person. But sometimes, Daniel, people need to see consequences. Real, public consequences. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. I acted normally, or as normally as I could. I didn't contact Emily or Ruth. I let them think I was licking my wounds, that I'd been frightened into silence by Ruth's threat. Meanwhile, I was working. I hired a video editor to create a slideshow of Ruth's life, the kind of sentimental tribute you'd expect at a milestone birthday. Photos from her childhood, her marriage, her years as Jameis' mother, but interspersed throughout were clips from those videos I'd found on the iPad. Carefully edited to tell a story. The story of Ruth's long con. The story of her hatred. The story of her plot. I coordinated with Daniel to have papers drawn up. A lawsuit for elder abuse, for conspiracy, for fraud. We gathered additional evidence, bank records showing Emily's sudden increased spending after moving in with Ruth, records of Ruth consulting with shady lawyers about conservatorship proceedings, documentation of my perfect health from my doctor, character references from friends and colleagues. We built an airtight case. And we prepared to serve it at the party. Daniel tried one more time to talk me out of the public spectacle. "We can do this quietly," he said. "Just file the suit, press charges, let the legal system handle it." But I shook my head. "Ruth has spent decades living a lie," I said. Pretending to be respectable, hiding her bitterness, playing the perfect mother-in-law. She wanted to destroy me in the shadows. I'm going to destroy her in the light. The day of the party arrived. I dressed carefully, a lovely lavender dress, pearls James had given me for our 25th anniversary, my hair styled perfectly. I looked every inch the respectable widow, the devoted mother, the woman who would never cause a scene. I drove to the community center with a covered dish, Ruth's favorite potato salad recipe, made exactly the way she liked it. When I walked in, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to me. I could see the shock on Ruth's face, the panic on Emily's. They hadn't expected me to come. Why would I, after what I'd discovered? But I smiled warmly and walked right up to Ruth. "Happy birthday," I said, kissing her cheek. She flinched slightly but recovered, her society manners kicking in. "Thank you for coming, Margaret," she said, her voice strained. "Of course," I replied. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." I greeted everyone like nothing was wrong, the church ladies, the neighbors, all the people who'd known me and Ruth for years. They were confused by my presence but accepting, welcoming me into conversations about Ruth's wonderful life, her dedication to family, her generosity. I smiled and nodded and agreed with everything. The party progressed normally for the first hour. Food, conversation, laughter. Ruth began to relax, though she kept shooting me suspicious glances. Emily stayed on the opposite side of the room, avoiding me entirely. And then it was time for the slideshow. The lights dimmed. Everyone gathered around the large screen that had been set up at the front of the room. Ruth sat in a place of honor, Emily beside her. I stood at the back, next to Daniel, who had arrived quietly during the food service. The video began. The first few minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Baby Ruth, young Ruth, Ruth as a bride, Ruth as a new mother. Sentimental music played. People smiled and pointed, recognizing familiar faces. Ruth looked pleased, basking in the attention. And then the music changed. The photos shifted. And suddenly, there on the screen, was Ruth in her study, speaking directly to the camera. "After all these years, I'm finally going to win," her recorded voice said clearly. Margaret never knew, never suspected. The room erupted in confused murmurs. People looked around, trying to understand what they were watching. But the video kept playing. Ruth's confession about being our father's illegitimate daughter, about her plan for revenge, about manipulating Emily. People gasped. Someone cried out. But I'd locked the doors. Daniel had helped me do it before the slideshow started. Nobody was leaving until they saw everything. The video continued, showing messages between Ruth and Emily. Their mocking words about me. Their plans to have me committed. Their scheme to steal my inheritance. Every damning piece of evidence, presented clearly and irrefutably. Ruth lunged for the screen, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. The church ladies, who'd admired her for decades, looked at her with horror and disgust. The neighbors, who'd thought her such a wonderful friend, backed away. Emily was sobbing openly, but no one moved to comfort her. When the slideshow ended, with Ruth's final recorded words, "I'm going to bury her just like Dad buried me," the lights came up. Silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Ruth, who stood frozen, her face ashen. I stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Ruth's birthday," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "I think we've all learned something important today about the woman we thought we knew." Daniel moved to stand beside me, and from his briefcase, he pulled out legal documents. He handed them to a process server who'd been waiting outside. The man walked straight to Ruth and placed the papers in her hands. "You've been served," he said professionally. Ruth stared at the documents, then at me, her expression twisting through shock, rage, and finally, fear. The papers detailed everything: the lawsuit for elder abuse, the criminal complaints Daniel had filed that morning, the restraining order that prohibited Ruth and Emily from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home. Emily tried to run, but Daniel had anticipated that too. Another process server appeared, handing her an identical set of papers. She crumpled, sinking to her knees on the community center floor, the papers scattering around her. The partygoers began filing out, their expressions ranging from shocked to disgusted. Many stopped by me on their way out, squeezing my hand, murmuring words of support. The church ladies, Ruth's supposed friends, pointedly avoided looking at her as they left. Within 15 minutes, the room had cleared. Only Ruth, Emily, Daniel, and I remained. And the process servers, standing guard at the exits. Ruth finally found her voice. "You vindictive bitch," she snarled, all pretense of civility gone. "You've ruined everything." I smiled, feeling calm for the first time in weeks. "No, Ruth," I said quietly. "You ruined everything. Decades ago, when you decided that your father's choices were somehow my fault. When you married into my family not for love but for revenge. When you poisoned my daughter against me. I was just living my life, loving my husband, raising my child. You're the one who couldn't let go. You're the one who destroyed a family." Emily's sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Shed made her choice. Shed looked at the mother who raised her with love and the grandmother who offered wealth, and Shed chosen wrong. The legal proceedings moved forward with stunning speed. With all the evidence ID provided, the district attorney's office was eager to prosecute. Ruth was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted conservatorship fraud, and elder abuse. Emily was charged as an accessory. Their lawyer, a nervous young man who seemed overwhelmed, tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that the messages and videos were taken out of context. But there was too much evidence, too many pieces that fit together perfectly. The judge wasn't buying it. The civil suit proceeded in parallel. Daniel presented our case methodically, the years of planning, the documented attempts to undermine my mental health, the financial motivations. Ruth's lawyers tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone seeking revenge rather than justice. But the evidence spoke for itself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding in my favor. The damages were substantial, not just compensation for emotional distress and legal fees, but punitive damages meant to send a message. Ruth was ordered to pay nearly everything she had. Her savings, her investments, it all came to me. Poetic justice, Daniel called it. The money Shed spent decades trying to steal was now legally mine. But the financial judgment was only part of Ruth's punishment. The real consequences were social. Within days of the party, the story had spread through our entire community. The video clips had been shared, the lawsuit details discussed, the whole sordid tale picked apart by everyone from church groups to bridge clubs. Ruth became a pariah. Her friends abandoned her. The church quietly asked her not to return. Her memberships in various social clubs were revoked. The respect Shed cultivated for decades evaporated overnight. Shed spent her whole adult life building a reputation as a gracious, generous pillar of the community. ID destroyed it in one afternoon. Emily's consequences were equally severe. Michael, her husband, had known nothing about the plot. When he learned what his wife had been planning, he filed for divorce immediately. He got primary custody of their 2 children, my grandchildren, who I'd barely seen in months. The court cited Emily's documented psychological manipulation and her willingness to abuse a vulnerable elder as evidence of poor judgment and character. Emily lost her children, her marriage, and her reputation. She tried to reach out to me twice, leaving tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness. I deleted them both without listening all the way through. Forgiveness would require remorse. And remorse would require Emily to understand what she'd done. I wasn't sure she was capable of that depth of self-reflection. The legal battles concluded on a gray morning in late December, just over 2 months after that horrible night when Emily had walked out of my home. I sat in the courtroom as the final judgment was read, officially transferring Ruth's remaining assets to me as restitution. Ruth wasn't present. She'd moved away, ID heard, to some small town in upstate New York where nobody knew her story. Running away from the consequences of her actions, just as Shed accused our father of doing decades before. The irony wasn't lost on me. Shed become the thing she claimed to hate. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt the weight of months of stress and fear lift from my shoulders. Daniel walked beside me, carrying his briefcase full of legal documents that proved justice had been served. "You did it," he said quietly. "You won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like survival. ID exposed the truth, protected myself, ensured that Ruth and Emily couldn't hurt me or anyone else again. But ID also lost my daughter, spent months in anguish, and learned that the woman ID called mother-in-law for 35 years had hated me all along. Victory, I was learning, often tastes bitter. I returned to my house, my clean, well-maintained, definitely not stinking house, and I walked through it slowly, seeing it with new eyes. These rooms held ghosts now, not just of James but of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. Yet they were also proof of my resilience. This was my home. My sanctuary. The place ID defended against people who would have stolen it from me. I opened all the windows despite the winter chill, letting fresh air sweep through every room. A cleansing. A renewal. And I began to plan my next chapter. The money from Ruth's assets gave me freedom ID never expected to have. Between that and Jameis' inheritance, I was more than comfortable. I was wealthy. I could do anything, go anywhere. For days, I considered my options. Travel, perhaps. ID always wanted to see Italy, to visit the places James and I had dreamed about. Or maybe ID finally write that book I'd been planning, the memoir of my teaching career. The possibilities stretched before me, dizzying in their scope. But first, I needed to heal. I needed to process what had happened, to make peace with the loss of my daughter and the betrayal of my trust. I started therapy. A wonderful woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in family trauma and elder abuse. She helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have prevented Ruth's decades-long grudge or Emily's corruption. "You were dealing with forces you didn't even know existed," she told me during one session. "A family secret from before you were born, festering for generations. How could you have protected against that?" Her words were healing in a way I hadn't expected. ID spent so much time wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a mother. Learning to release that guilt was a process, but I was committed to it. I also reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the worst of the crisis. My book club welcomed me back warmly, and one evening over wine, I told them the whole story. Their reactions ranged from shock to outrage to fierce protectiveness. One woman, Patricia, grabbed my hand and said, "You should have called us. We would have helped." "I know," I said. I was just so ashamed. I felt like I'd failed somehow. But I realize now that asking for help isn't failure. It's survival. That night marked a turning point. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as a survivor. The difference was subtle but profound. Michael reached out to me in January. He brought my grandchildren, Sophie, 8, and Lucas, 6, to my house for the first time in months. The kids were subdued, clearly confused about why mommy wasn't with them anymore. I hugged them tight, breathing in their little kid scents of shampoo and playground dirt. I'd missed them so much. Michael and I talked while the kids played in the backyard. He apologized, though he had nothing to apologize for. "I should have seen what Emily was doing," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have protected you." "You couldn't have known," I told him. "She fooled us both. But thank you for bringing them here. They need stability right now." "And you need family," he said simply. It became a regular thing, these Sunday visits with my grandchildren. I taught Sophie to bake cookies using my mother's old recipe. I read books to Lucas and helped him with the homework his teacher sent home. Slowly, carefully, I rebuilt the grandmother role that had been stolen from me. The kids asked about Emily I might never know. And I was learning to accept that. Summer brought unexpected joy. I decided to take that trip to Italy, but I didn't go alone. I invited Patricia and 2 other women from my book club, all widows like me, all hungry for adventure. We spent 3 weeks exploring Rome, Florence, Venice. We ate incredible food, drank wine, marveled at art and architecture. We laughed until we cried and cried until we laughed. It was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. These women became my chosen family, the family I selected based on shared values and genuine affection rather than blood ties that apparently meant nothing. One evening in Florence, sitting at an outdoor cafe watching the sunset paint the Duomo gold and rose, Patricia raised her glass. "To Margaret," she said. "Who showed us all what strength really looks like." The others joined the toast, their glasses clinking against mine. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears. Happy tears. I'd survived. More than survived, I'd reclaimed my life and built something new from the wreckage. I'd found my tribe, my purpose, my strength. Emily and Ruth had tried to bury me, but instead, they'd excavated the warrior I'd forgotten lived inside me. We returned home tanned and full of stories. My house welcomed me back, no longer feeling haunted but instead feeling like a true home again. I'd redecorated while preparing for the trip, getting rid of some of Jame's things I'd been clinging to, updating furniture, adding my own touches. It felt like my space now, not a shrine to the past but a launching pad for the future. I hosted dinner parties. I joined a painting class. I volunteered at a women's shelter, using my experience to help others recognize and escape manipulative relationships. My days were full in a way they hadn't been even before the betrayal. The holidays approached again, marking nearly a year since Emily had walked out. Michael asked if I wanted to host Thanksgiving for him and the kids. I said yes, throwing myself into preparation with enthusiasm. Sophie and Lucas helped me cook, their small hands messy with flour and cranberry sauce. We made turkey and stuffing and pie, the kitchen filled with warmth and laughter. As we sat down to eat, Michael at one end of the table and me at the other, kids in between, I felt a pang of sadness for what might have been. If Emily were here. If Ruth hadn't poisoned everything. But then Lucas said something silly that made Sophie giggle, and I realized that this right here, right now, was enough. More than enough. It was beautiful. The civil suit judgment was finally executed in early December. The last of Ruth's money transferred into my accounts, officially closing that chapter. Daniel called to congratulate me. "It's done," he said. "Everything's finalized." "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Free," I finally said. "I feel free." And it was true. The anger that had burned so hot in those first weeks had mellowed into something quieter. Not forgiveness. I wasn't sure I'd ever truly forgive what had been done to me. But acceptance. An understanding that people are complicated, that hurt people, that sometimes the only thing you can do is protect yourself and move forward. I used some of Ruth's money to establish a scholarship fund at the high school where I'd taught. The Margaret Memorial Scholarship, named not for me but for my mother, who'd never had the chance for higher education but who'd valued it fiercely. It would help students from difficult backgrounds pursue college, giving them opportunities my mother had dreamed of. It felt right, using money born from bitterness to create something positive. Transforming Ruth's legacy of hate into something that helped others. She would have hated it. That made it even better. On the anniversary of the day Emily left, I stood in my living room and I thought about how much had changed. A year ago, I'd been devastated, broken, questioning everything about my life and my worth. Now I stood in a home I'd defended and reclaimed, surrounded by friends I cherished, engaged in work that mattered, planning a future bright with possibility. The pain hadn't disappeared. I suspected it never fully would. Some losses cut too deep to heal completely. But I'd learned to carry it differently. Not as a burden that broke me down, but as a reminder of my strength. I thought about Ruth sometimes, wondering if she'd found any peace in her exile. I thought about Emily more often, hoping she was doing the work of becoming a better person, someone her children could be proud of. But mostly, I thought about myself. About the woman I'd become through this crucible. Stronger, yes. More cautious, definitely. But also more certain of my worth, more protective of my boundaries, more clear about what I would and wouldn't accept from others. The people who loved me would receive endless patience and kindness. But those who tried to manipulate or harm me? They would find steel beneath the soft exterior. They would discover that underestimating me was a mistake. Ruth had learned that lesson. So had Emily. My blog continued to grow. I shared not just my story but my healing process, the strategies I'd learned for rebuilding after betrayal, the ways I'd found meaning in the aftermath. Readers reached out to thank me, to share their own triumphs over family dysfunction. I formed connections with other advocates, other survivors, building a network of people committed to exposing and preventing elder abuse. My pain had purpose now. Ruth had wanted to bury me in silence and shame. Instead, I'd turned my voice into a megaphone, ensuring that what happened to me would help protect others. Sophie asked me once, during one of our Sunday baking sessions, if I was sad about her mom. It was a gutsy question for an 8-year-old, and I respected her courage. I am sad, I told her honestly. I'm sad about the choices she made and the relationship we lost. But I'm not sad about my life. I have you and your brother, your dad, my friends, my work. I have so much to be grateful for. She nodded thoughtfully, her small hands kneading dough. That's good, Grandma, she said. Being happy is important. From the mouths of babes. She was right. Being happy was important. And I was learning how to be happy again, not in spite of what happened but almost because of it. The crucible had burned away the unnecessary, leaving only what was essential. Lucas had his own wisdom to share, delivered with the unfiltered honesty of a 6-year-old. I like that you're not sad anymore, Grandma, he said during one visit. You smile now like you mean it. I gathered him into a hug, this perceptive little person who saw more than anyone gave him credit for. I do mean it, sweetheart, I told him. I mean it completely. Because it was true. The smiles were real now. The laughter was genuine. The joy wasn't forced or faked but authentically felt. I'd earned this happiness through surviving the worst and choosing to thrive anyway. Winter settled in again, bringing with it a sense of completion. I sat by my fireplace on Christmas Eve, alone by choice rather than circumstance. Michael had the kids for Christmas, and I'd been invited to 3 different friends' celebrations but had declined them all. Sometimes, you need to be alone to fully appreciate how far you've come. I looked around my living room, the decorations I'd chosen, the furniture I loved, the photos of people who genuinely cared about me. This was my sanctuary. My kingdom. My proof that I'd survived the siege and come out victorious. There were still hard days. Days when I missed Emily with an ache that took my breath away. Days when I wondered if I could have done something differently, said something better, been someone else who might have prevented the betrayal. But Dr. Martinez had taught me to recognize those thoughts for what they were, normal grief responses, not truth. The truth was simpler. I had loved my daughter completely, raised her well, and been a good mother. Her choices were hers. Her betrayal was hers. And while I had to live with the consequences, I didn't have to carry the blame. Ruth's words from that video played in my head sometimes, unbidden. I'm going to bury her just like Dad buried me. But she'd been wrong. I wasn't buried. I was thriving, living, creating, connecting. If anyone was buried, it was Ruth, entombed by her own bitterness, isolated by her own choices. I'd learned something crucial through this experience, that revenge doesn't heal wounds. It might feel satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't fill the void left by betrayal. What heals is choosing to move forward, to build something new, to refuse to let someone else's darkness dim your light. As the clock struck midnight, marking the transition to Christmas Day and to a new beginning, I raised my glass of wine in a private toast. To survival, I whispered. To strength. To knowing when to fight and when to walk away. To building a life worth living, not in spite of what happened but because of what I learned from it. I drank, and the wine was sweet on my tongue. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my home, in my life, surrounded by the love I'd chosen and the dignity I'd reclaimed. Ruth had wanted me to know how it felt to rot alone. But she'd been projecting. She was the one rotting, eaten alive by decades of bitterness and resentment. I wasn't rotting. I was growing. Blooming, even. Finding new soil to put down roots in, new sources of sunlight to turn toward. The garden of my life had been devastated by a storm, yes. But gardens can be replanted. And sometimes, the second planting is even more beautiful than the first because you choose the seeds more carefully, tend the soil with more intention, appreciate each bloom as the gift it is. I thought about the message Emily had sent during that fateful dinner party. Is she buying it? 4 words that had changed everything by revealing the truth. In a way, I owed those words a debt of gratitude. Without them, I might have walked blindly into Ruth's trap. I might have lost everything, my home, my autonomy, my sanity, my life as I knew it. Instead, those 4 words had given me the gift of knowledge. And knowledge, as my teaching career had proven time and again, was the ultimate power. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I was 66 now, older than I'd been when this all started but somehow feeling younger. Or maybe not younger, but more alive. More present. More aware of each moment and its preciousness. Betrayal had taught me that nothing is guaranteed, that the people you trust most can hurt you deepest. But survival had taught me that you're stronger than you think, that you can rebuild after devastation, that happiness is a choice you make every single day. I wondered sometimes if Emily would ever truly understand what she'd done. Not just the practical consequences, the divorce, the custody loss, the legal penalties, but the deeper damage. The way she'd shattered a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. The way she'd weaponized my love against me. The way she'd proven that even the most fundamental relationships could be corrupted by greed and manipulation. Would she ever sit in her own living room someday and truly comprehend the magnitude of her betrayal? Would she ever feel the weight of what she'd destroyed? I hoped so, for her sake more than mine. Because living without that understanding meant living without the possibility of genuine redemption. But her redemption wasn't my responsibility. That was perhaps the most important lesson ID learned through all of this. For decades, ID taken responsibility for everyone, for my students, for my husband, for my daughter, even for my mother-in-law. ID carried their burdens, solved their problems, smoothed over their difficulties. And look where it had gotten me. Used. Betrayed. Nearly destroyed. No more. Now I was responsible for myself. For my own happiness, my own healing, my own life. Everyone else would have to carry their own weight. The clock ticked forward, minutes becoming hours, Christmas Eve becoming Christmas Day. I stayed by the fire, lost in thought and memory and a growing sense of peace. This was my life now. Not the life ID planned or expected, but the life ID built from the ruins of betrayal. And it was good. Better than good, it was mine in a way nothing had ever been before. Not inherited, not shared, not compromised. Mine. Claimed through battle and defended with fierce determination. Mine to shape and fill and enjoy as I saw fit. When I finally went to bed, the house was quiet around me. But it wasn't the lonely quiet of those first terrible weeks after Emily left. It was the peaceful quiet of a space that was truly home, truly safe, truly mine. I slept well. That night, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who'd fought their battles and earned their rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities. But tonight, in this moment, I was content. I had everything I needed. I was everything I needed to be. And that, after everything I'd been through, everything I'd survived, everything I'd overcome, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.